We're just days away from reaching 1,000 subscribers. If we hit this goal in the next 15 days, we'll be able to keep the channel running and continue bringing you these stories. Your subscription makes all the difference. It's quick and helps us enormously. The Secret of a Hidden Fortune. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Lady. On this foggy November morning in 1849, the London branch of Rothschild Bank buzzed with its usual activity. Gentlemen in morning coats and ladies of high society crowded the carpeted salons to manage their important financial transactions. In this temple of British finance, every client was treated with the deference due to their fortune and social rank. It was in this context that Amelia Hartwell made her entrance, immediately creating a striking contrast with the usual clientele. 24 years old, she wore a simple grey wool dress, certainly clean and well cut, but without any ostentatious ornament. Her auburn hair was styled in a modest chignon, and she wore no visible jewellery. Everything about her breathed the bourgeois condition without particular fortune. The customer service manager, Mr. Pemberton, welcomed her with the polite but distant courtesy reserved for clients of lesser importance. "Miss, how may I be of service to you today?" "Good morning, sir. I would simply like to check the balance of my account," Amelia replied in a soft but assured voice. Mr. Pemberton suppressed a condescending smile. A simple balance check. This young woman of modest appearance probably possessed a few pounds at most, perhaps a small family inheritance. "Of course, miss. May I have your full name?" "Amelia Charlotte Hartwell." The banker consulted his registers with the mechanical efficiency of one who handles dozens of similar requests each day. He expected to find an account with modest figures, perhaps a few £100s, which would justify his client's humble attitude. Meanwhile, at the other end of the salon, a man observed the scene with undisguised amusement. It was Duke Alexander Montrose, one of England's most fortunate peers, who had just concluded an important commercial transaction with the bank. At 32, Alexander was an imposing man with black hair and piercing grey eyes. Accustomed to the splendours of high society and complex financial intrigues, what amused him was the obvious contrast between this young woman's modest appearance and the grandiose setting of London's most prestigious bank. He wondered what paltry sum this account consultation would reveal, and he couldn't help but smile, imagining the lady's embarrassment when she perhaps discovered her funds were even meagre than she thought. Mr. Pemberton, however, was frowning as he browsed through his registers. The name Amelia Hartwell vaguely rang a bell, but he couldn't quite place it. He checked a second time, then a third, before raising perplexed eyes to his client. "Miss Hartwell, could you confirm your date of birth? For security reasons, you understand." "September 15th, 1825, sir." The banker consulted another register, more voluminous this time, the one reserved for exceptional clientele accounts. His eyes gradually widened, and his jaw dropped slightly as he browsed through a series of numbers that seemed to defy all logic. "Miss, could you wait a few moments? I must verify certain information with my superior." Amelia nodded quietly, accustomed to this type of reaction. Mr. Pemberton disappeared into the private offices, leaving the young woman alone, facing the curious gazes of other clients. Duke Alexander, intrigued by this unexpected development, approached discreetly. "Forgive my indiscretion, miss, but it seems your simple balance check is causing a certain agitation." Amelia raised toward him eyes of deep blue that struck him with their intelligence and serenity. "Indeed, sir. It happens sometimes. Allow me to introduce myself. Alexander Montrose, Duke of Ravensholt." "Amelia Hartwell," she replied simply, showing not the slightest particular deference to the ducal title. This absence of reverence intrigued Alexander even more. Either this woman was completely ignorant of social customs, or she possessed an assurance that didn't match her modest appearance. Mr. Pemberton returned accompanied by Mr. Whitmore, the branch director himself, a distinguished man with silver hair who usually only moved for the most important clients. His attitude had completely changed. From condescending it had become obsequiously respectful. "Miss Hartwell," exclaimed Mr. Whitmore with a marked bow, "what an honor to welcome you to our establishment. Forgive us this wait, but we wanted to ensure the perfect accuracy of our information." Duke Alexander observed this transformation with growing astonishment. Who was this mysterious Amelia Hartwell to provoke such regard from the director of London's most prestigious bank? "Here, then, is the updated balance of your account, miss," said Mr. Whitmore, handing a document to Amelia. The young woman quickly scanned the figures, nodded calmly, then handed the paper back to Mr. Whitmore. "Thank you, sir. Everything seems in order." But Mr. Whitmore, in his eagerness to serve this exceptional client well, committed a fatal error. In taking back the document, he let it slip, and it fell at Duke Alexander's feet. Out of pure politeness, Alexander bent down to pick up the paper and return it to Mr. Whitmore. But in standing up, his gaze couldn't avoid scanning the figures written on the document. What he read, literally, took his breath away. The balance of Amelia Charlotte Hartwell's account amounted to £2,843,000 sterling. A fortune that exceeded that of most dukes in England, hidden under the appearance of a modest bourgeoise who came to simply check her balance as if it were a few shillings in a piggy bank. Alexander remained frozen, the document in his hand, unable to hide his stupefaction. Amelia, noticing his distress, gave him a benevolent smile. "Is something wrong, Your Grace?" The Duke, for the first time in his life, found himself speechless. This woman he had taken for a little bourgeois without fortune was actually one of the richest people in England, and she walked around London like any ordinary citizen, without escort, without ostentation, without anything that could betray her extraordinary wealth. Forgive me," he stammered, returning the document to her. "I thought I saw. That is to say." "You saw correctly," Amelia said with an amused smile. "That is indeed my balance." Chapter 2. Revelations and Questions. The effect of this revelation on Duke Alexander was so spectacular that Mr. Whitmore thought it best to intervene to avoid a diplomatic incident in his establishment. "Your Grace," he said with deference, "perhaps you would like to discuss in a more private setting. I have a private salon at your disposal." Alexander, still in shock, nodded mechanically. Amelia, understanding that her quiet visit to the bank had just taken an unexpected turn, accepted the invitation with the natural grace that characterized her. Mr. Whitmore's private salon was a little jewel of British refinement: mahogany paneling, green leather armchairs, and portraits of former bank directors contemplating the premises with their stern gazes. Tea and biscuits were immediately served, while the two protagonists of this extraordinary scene took their places facing each other. "Miss Hartwell," Alexander began after regaining his composure, "forgive my stupefaction, but I must admit that your financial situation doesn't exactly correspond to the image you project." Amelia delicately sipped her tea before responding. "Why should my appearance reflect my fortune, Your Grace? Does money so fundamentally change a person? Well, usually wealthy people display their riches. It's even socially expected." "And why? To impress whom? To attract what?" Amelia set down her cup with a slight smile. "You see, Your Grace, I've discovered that ostentatious wealth mainly attracts two types of people: interested flatterers and refined thieves." This response struck Alexander with its accuracy. He himself, since inheriting his title and fortune, was constantly surrounded by people whose true motivations he could never be sure of. But then, he said, intrigued, how do you live day to day? Where do you reside? How do you manage your affairs? I have a small house in Bloomsbury, quite suitable. I read a lot. I travel when the urge takes me, and I attend to some personal projects. Personal projects. Amelia hesitated for a moment, as if evaluating whether she could trust this duke who had just discovered her secret by accident. I finance schools for poor children, Your Grace, discreetly, without publicity or social recognition. You finance schools? How many? Currently, 17 in London's working-class districts and 12 in northern industrial towns. We educate about 800 children per year. Alexander remained speechless. This discreet woman was conducting, in the shadows, philanthropic works of a scope that exceeded those of most great aristocratic families. But where does this fortune come from? He couldn't help asking. Forgive my curiosity, but such a sum doesn't accumulate by chance. My paternal grandfather was a ship owner, Amelia explained. He made his fortune in trade with the Indies. My father multiplied this inheritance by investing in emerging railways. And she smiled mischievously. Let's say I have a certain talent for industrial investments. You manage your own investments. Who else would do it? Financial advisors tend to be cautious with other people's money, especially when those others are women. I learned very early to read company balance sheets and understand market mechanisms. Alexander was fascinated. Here was a woman who not only possessed a colossal fortune, but who actively and intelligently managed it while conducting charitable works of considerable scope, all in perfect discretion. Miss Hartwell, he finally said, may I ask you a direct question? Please do. Why are you telling me all this? After all, we've just met, and your secret was well guarded. Amelia looked at him thoughtfully. Because you discovered my situation by accident, and your reaction seemed sincere. You were stupefied, but not greedy. Curious, but not calculating. That's quite rare, Your Grace. Quite rare. Let me tell you a little story, Amelia said, leaning slightly forward. 2 years ago, I attended a charity ball. Out of curiosity, I had decided to go there dressed simply as today. Do you know what happened? I can easily imagine. I was ignored all evening, not one invitation to dance, not one extended conversation, just minimal politeness. Then by chance, a gentleman discovered my identity and fortune. In less than an hour, I was surrounded by eager suitors, ambitious mothers, and charity organizers who suddenly discovered my exceptional qualities. Alexander grimaced, recognizing behavior he had often observed in his own circle. It was then that I decided to live in anonymity, Amelia continued. Not out of misanthropy, but to discover who people really were when money didn't enter the equation. And what did you discover? That most social relationships in our milieu are based on interest rather than genuine affection. That the most interesting conversations often arise in the most unexpected places. And that true generosity is rarely found where one expects it. Alexander pondered these words. This woman had just summarized in a few phrases a truth he had felt himself without ever daring to admit it. Miss Hartwell, he finally said, would you accept to dine with me tonight? Not as a duke courting an heiress, but simply as two people who perhaps have interesting things to say to each other. Amelia looked at him attentively, searching his eyes for the sincerity of this invitation. What she found there must have satisfied her, because she smiled for the first time since the beginning of their conversation. With pleasure, Your Grace, but on one condition. Which is that we share the bill. Each pays their part. That way, we'll be on perfectly equal footing. Alexander burst out laughing. a frank and spontaneous laugh that completely transformed his face. For the first time in his life, a woman was proposing to share the bill for dinner. "Deal, Miss Hartwell. It will be the first dinner of my life where I won't know which of us is really paying the bill." Chapter 3. An Evening of Revelations. The restaurant Alexander chose for their dinner was a discreet establishment in Mayfair, renowned for its excellent cuisine and refined but unobtrusive clientele, the ideal place for a conversation without indiscreet witnesses or embarrassing recognition. Amelia arrived dressed in a navy blue silk dress, elegant but without extravagance, which revealed for the first time her graceful silhouette and natural beauty that she usually took care to conceal. Alexander, seeing her enter, understood that she had made a special effort for this evening, while maintaining that simplicity that characterized her. "You look lovely," he said, rising to welcome her. "Thank you," she replied simply, without blushing or false modesty. "I thought the occasion merited a small sartorial effort." They took their places at an isolated table, and Alexander couldn't help noticing how perfectly at ease Amelia seemed in this refined setting, despite her usual affectation of simplicity. "Tell me," he began after they had ordered, "how did you come to develop this particular philosophy of life? Most heiresses I know dream of balls and finery." Amelia smiled while tasting her glass of wine. "Perhaps because I had a somewhat different childhood. My father died when I was 15, and my mother the following year. I found myself alone with a considerable fortune and guardians who mainly wanted to see me quickly marry a man capable of managing my assets in my place. You refused. I dismissed the guardians and took my affairs in hand. It wasn't done without difficulties. Imagine a 16-year-old girl trying to establish herself in London's financial milieu. How did you do it?" "At first, I used male intermediaries, businessmen I paid to represent my interests. Then gradually, I learned to earn respect through my competence rather than my condition." Alexander listened to her with fascination. This woman had accomplished what most men of his acquaintance would have been incapable of, taking control of a financial empire and developing it alone. "And the suitors?" he asked. "A fortune like yours must have attracted many covetous interests." "Oh, I had them," Amelia laughed. "Dozens, each more charming than the last. All perfectly disinterested, of course. I even received 3 marriage proposals on the same day from men who had each met me only once." "How did you turn them away?" "Very simply, I proposed that they sign a marriage contract, stipulating that my fortune would remain entirely under my control, and that in case of divorce, they would be entitled to nothing. Curiously, they all discovered sudden incompatibilities with my life plans." Alexander burst out laughing. "You are formidable, Miss Hartwell. I am realistic, Your Grace. And you, how does a duke as fortunate as you come to be interested in the motivations of a stranger met in a bank?" This direct question caught Alexander off guard. "Honestly, because you are the first person in a long time to speak to me without ulterior motives. Do you know what it's like to never be sure if people appreciate you for yourself or for your title and fortune?" "I believe I do," Amelia said softly. "That's exactly why I chose anonymity. But you at least have a choice. I wear my title on my face. Impossible to pass myself off as a simple gentleman." "Ma, don't be so sure," Amelia said with a mischievous smile. "Tonight, for example, you're just Alexander. I don't know the Duke, I've never met him. I only know a man who showed spontaneous generosity to a stranger and who laughs frankly when something amuses him." This reflection touched Alexander more deeply than he would have thought possible. When had he stopped being simply himself to become permanently the Duke of Ravensholt? "Amelia," he said, using her first name for the first time, "may I ask you a very personal question?" "Please do." "Are you happy? Truly happy, despite all this wealth and solitude you impose on yourself? Amelia reflected for a long time before answering. I am serene. I do what seems right to me. I help whom I can help, and I avoid unnecessary complications. But happy in the sense you mean? I don't know. Perhaps something is missing from my life. What? Companionship, sincere affection, someone with whom to share not my fortune, but my thoughts, my plans, my dreams, someone who wouldn't change their attitude upon learning who I really am. These words resonated strangely in Alexander's heart. Wasn't this exactly what he himself was seeking without daring to admit it? Amelia, he said impulsively, what would you say if I proposed that we see each other again? Not as a duke and an heiress, but as Alexander and Amelia, two people who perhaps have things to discover together. I would say it's the first time a man has made me this proposal without knowing my fortune, she replied with a tender smile, and that it makes me curious to discover who Alexander really is when he's not obliged to be ducal. So it's agreed. It's agreed. But on one condition. Another condition? Alexander laughed. Next time, I choose the restaurant. And I guarantee it will be much less chic than this one. Deal. Even if you take me to a tavern by the port, I'll be there. Careful, Amelia said with an impish smile. Don't tempt the devil. I've just spotted a little establishment near the docks that serves excellent fish and chips. For the first time in a long while, Alexander had the feeling that the evening ahead was going to be full of delightful surprises. Chapter 4. Love Beyond Appearances. 3 months had elapsed since that first meeting at the bank, and Alexander discovered each day a new facet of the extraordinary Amelia Hartwell. True to her promise, she had indeed taken him to unexpected places. A small Italian restaurant in Soho, run by an immigrant family, a tavern near the Thames, frequented by sailors and dockworkers, and even a modest tea salon in Bloomsbury, where she was a regular. What fascinated Alexander was seeing how naturally Amelia moved in all these environments. She conversed with the same ease with the Italian waitress as with great bankers, listened with the same attention to old sailors' stories as to the most complex financial reports. You are a social chameleon, he told her one afternoon as they strolled through Hyde Park. How do you manage to be so comfortable everywhere? Perhaps because I don't consider myself superior to anyone, Amelia replied simply. Money doesn't make you more intelligent, more sensitive, or more worthy of interest. It simply gives you more options. But still, your education, your culture. My education I owe to my governess, Miss Patterson, a remarkable woman who was the daughter of a country pastor. My culture I acquired by reading in the public library as much as in my father's, and my best life lessons I learned by observing ordinary people do extraordinary things. This philosophy of life enchanted Alexander, but it also worried him. How could this woman, so different from everything he had known, adapt to his world if they decided to build something together? As if reading his thoughts, Amelia stopped near the lake and turned to him. Alexander, there's something we need to address. What? We've been seeing each other for 3 months, and I can sense you're asking yourself questions about our social compatibility. Alexander blushed slightly. Am I so transparent? You're an honest man, wondering how an eccentric millionaire could integrate into a duke's life. It's quite legitimate. And what do you think about this question? Amelia smiled and took his arm to resume their walk. I think you underestimate my adaptive capacities. I may have chosen to live simply, but I haven't forgotten the codes of aristocracy. When necessary, I know perfectly well how to play the role expected of me. Really? Do you want an example? Tonight, Lady Pemberton is giving a charity ball to finance an orphanage. I'll be there. Alexander stopped short. Lady Pemberton was one of the most influential women in London high society, and her balls were events where all of aristocracy was expected to appear. "You'll be at Lady Pemberton's ball. But how?" "I have my entrances, Alexander. After all, I discreetly finance several of her charitable works. She would be quite embarrassed to refuse me an invitation." "And you plan to go there?" "How?" "Like a duchess, obviously. Worth gown, family jewels, armoured carriage, the whole grand display. You'll see, no one will recognize the little bourgeoise from Rothschild Bank." That evening, Alexander went to the ball with curiosity mixed with apprehension. Would he recognize his Amelia under the attire of a great lady? The answer came as soon as he saw her descend the marble staircase of Lady Pemberton's private mansion. Dressed in an emerald satin gown that enhanced the colour of her eyes, adorned with a diamond tiara that caught all the reflections of the chandeliers, Amelia was dazzling, but what struck Alexander most was her natural ease. She moved through this assembly with the grace of a woman born to this world. "Your Grace," she said, making him a perfect curtsy when he approached her. "What a pleasure to find you here." "Miss Hartwell," he replied, bowing. "You are dazzling." "Let's not exaggerate," she said with a mischievous smile. "It's just a matter of costume. Tomorrow, I'll become again the woman who shares fish and chips with you near the docks." This perfectly assumed duality completed Alexander's conquest. Amelia wasn't an adventuress trying to rise socially, nor an aristocrat playing at slumming. She was simply herself, capable of adapting to all situations without ever losing her authenticity. The evening was a revelation. Amelia danced with the greatest names of aristocracy, conversed brilliantly with ambassadors, and even charmed the formidable Lady Pemberton. But above all, Alexander noticed that she remained true to herself, subtly slipping into her conversations references to her charitable works, skillfully steering discussions toward useful subjects. "You were perfect," he told her when they found themselves alone on the garden terrace. "I was what the situation required," she corrected. "But Alexander, you must understand one thing. I can play this role when necessary, but it's not who I really am. If we're to build something together, you must accept both aspects of my personality." "Amelia," Alexander said, taking her gloved hands in his, "it's exactly this complexity that fascinates me about you. You're not prisoner to any role, any convention. You are free, truly free. And you, Alexander, would you be capable of this freedom, of sometimes choosing authenticity rather than conventions?" For his only answer, Alexander removed his gloves, took Amelia's face between his hands, and kissed her tenderly under the stars, in the middle of Lady Pemberton's garden, in full view of anyone who might pass by. "Does that answer your question?" he murmured against her lips. "It's a good start," Amelia smiled. "But I hope you're ready for other adventures, because if you marry me, Your Grace, your life will never be predictable again." "I'm counting on it," Alexander replied, holding her close. "I'm counting on it." 6 months later, the marriage of the Duke of Ravensholt to Miss Amelia Hartwell caused a sensation throughout London, not only because of the bride's extraordinary fortune revealed for the occasion, but especially because of the originality of the ceremony. After the traditional religious service in St. Paul's Cathedral, the newlyweds offered a reception in Hyde Park's public gardens, open to all neighbourhood residents. "My dear Amelia," Alexander said, watching her dance with an old dock worker who had served her Friday fish for months, "I believe our marriage is going to revolutionize London society." "I certainly hope so," she laughed, returning to him. It was time for aristocracy to rediscover that true nobility isn't measured by titles, but by actions. And in the years that followed, the Ravensholt couple indeed became legendary. not for their splendor, but for their social innovations, forever transforming London's idea of what a 19th century Duke and Duchess should be.